Hello, I'm Jess Bozzo of Performative, a division of Argyle, the leading online resource for the Office of the CFO. I would like to welcome everyone to today's event entitled The Year-End, Get It Right, Do It Fast, and Be Strategic. I would like to thank our sponsor, Hubble. Hubble is a corporate performance management solution that fully integrates reporting, analytics, and planning for growth-driven organizations. You can learn more about their solutions at gohubble.com. Their commitment to thought leadership in this realm helps us make today's webinar possible and delivered at no cost to the participants. Before we get started, I'll cover a few features of the console. On the left-hand side, you'll be able to view slides and polling questions during the webcast. You'll also be able to download a PDF of today's slides by clicking on the link in the resource list icon area. We invite you to ask questions at any time during today's webcast in the Q&A area of your console. In terms of the learning objectives for the webinar, after attending, you will be able to identify opportunities to create repeatable year-end validations to improve confidence in the results, get it right, spot processes that can be expedited and streamlined, do it fast, and determine valuable strategic opportunities to change your year-end activities to add value all year long. Be strategic. Before I introduce our featured speakers, we have a few housekeeping items to cover. The slides are available under handouts. We will send you links to the presentation and the recording within 24 hours. For those seeking credit today, you must answer all polling questions and remain on the line for the duration of the webinar. Credits are awarded in 24 hours. If you have any questions on credits, please email cpe@performative.com. Please submit any and all questions that come up during today's webinar into the Q&A section of the interface. And finally, please take the short survey at the end of the webinar. Now, it is my distinct pleasure to welcome our featured speakers from Hubble. John Lovar, Director of Product. With a background as a certified public accountant and auditor, John has a soft spot for the year-end. His acute interest in manufacturing led him to leave auditing to spearhead and manage the financial reporting and planning of a $3.5 billion company where he became enamored with streamlining processes and championing the strategic role of finance. We also have Julie Holmes, Director of Product Marketing. Julie brings her enthusiasm, passion, and 18-plus years of ERP experience to every conversation. With an international background in ERP implementation, specializing in finance, she has the systems expertise to understand the technology. I'll now turn things over to Julie. Welcome, Julie. Over to you.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to this webinar. We're going to make this as fast and painless as possible because, after all, that's what you'd want your year-end to be, wouldn't it? So John and I are going to take you through a few things today. Again, my name is Julie Holmes, and also with me is John. To get to know us a little better, we've put a little Meet Me slide up here so you guys could get a picture of us and see what we look like. That's me, the girl. John's the guy on the other side. And I am a certified KPI professional, and I spend a lot of my time working on thought leadership around how businesses measure success and how they implement measures and technology in order to gain greater success in their organization. My background, as Jess stated, is around ERP implementations, and specifically I've worked with some of the major ERPs and have come from a product management, a product strategy angle for most of those. And I'm the former Oracle Financials product manager. John, would you like to take a moment and introduce yourself?
Sure. Julie, you forgot to mention that you appear to be from the dark side as well in this picture. Just saying. Anyways, I'm Director of Product Strategy here at Hubble, and I used to be a former CPA auditor, so I'm sort of recovering from that still. That was many years ago, but I've been out and about for a long time. In previous roles, I've worked as an FP&A leader for manufacturing entities, and I've helped companies migrate to new and modern tools. And I currently take my accounting background and I work with development to build newer software that helps solve real-world end-user accounting-focused issues, really. So I tend to think of myself as a thought leader in reporting, analytics, and planning as well.
Well, the year-end is clearly a good example of an area that could definitely use some technology advancement. So let's talk about what the plan is. So the plan for this webinar is to cover a few key things. We're going to talk a little bit about the current state of the year-end and really try to understand, what are people going through today and what are you trying to accomplish. And we're also going to talk about the 3 keys to go through for that year-end awesomeness. And we're really going to talk about kind of what Jess mentioned in the beginning. How do you get it right? How do you get it efficient? And then finally, how do you get strategic? And then we're going to talk a little bit about some of the future of year-end. So where do we think that year-end and technology can go to help expedite businesses in the long term? So when we look at the current state of year-end, I think John and I will both, share our experiences, and certainly we would love to know in comments if you are experiencing some of the same things that we did. As someone who supported financial close for years, it was definitely the area of the business where people really struggled. As soon as the words year-end came up, you could just see everyone deflate. And John, was that your experience as well?
Absolutely, and I promise to get into it and make people a little bit uncomfortable in my presentation about it. So.
Good. So let's carry on. So we know that year-end is largely a painful experience, and we're going to talk a little bit about what the goals of that are. But let's go on to our first poll question, because what I really want to know is what are your biggest challenges around year-end. So I'm going to process on to the poll question. Jess, would you mind taking over from here?
Absolutely. Thanks, Julie. Our first question is, what are your biggest challenges at year-end? The options are takes too long to run reports, performance, struggle to get the reports that I need, lack of sufficiently trained staff, consolidations for multiple companies, issues related to multiple currencies, changing demands from execs, issues related to budgeting, planning, and variances, reconciliations, or audit stuff. Please note that this question is multi-select, so please choose all that apply and take a few moments to select your answers. As a reminder for those attendees seeking credit for today's webcast, you will need to answer all 3 polling questions. I will leave this question up for a few more seconds to allow the remainder of the attendees to answer, and once I shut this question down, we will share the results and have John and Julie make a few comments. So please go ahead and make your selections, and now John and Julie, I'll share the results with you guys for a few comments.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So, John, do you want to take a look at some of these and give your opinions?
Yeah, I mean, the one that sticks out right away is reconciliations to me, and I'm quite familiar with that issue, and I'm glad to see that popping out because I plan to talk quite a bit about that. And I guess following that is audit stuff. Nobody loves the auditors. It's unfortunate because I used to be one, so I know the mindset there. We'll talk a little bit about roll forwards and maybe how we might be able to automate some of that too. But certainly, this is all standard stuff that I'm quite familiar with at year end, and glad to see that it's sort of spread across all the challenges. This is typically what we expect to see and how we build software. So.
I'd like to take a moment and talk about just a couple of these and more specifically as well. The first one is around this consolidations for multiple companies. It is one of the things that comes up repeatedly in conversations with our customers, and it's certainly something I experienced when I was a systems director for a multinational company that had a ton of different subsidiaries. And one of the interesting challenges is not just that you have to do those consolidations, but also that those consolidations are often coming from different systems. And so there's a huge challenge around being able to get visibility into all of those different systems and at the same time to be able to generate those consolidations for all of them. And really what my customers have always experienced, and even what I experienced myself when I was in that role, was the challenge of getting that information in real time. So being able at any point during the course of the month to actually be able to see what the state of affairs was with all of the different companies and to get that kind of real-time visibility was always a challenge. And it's actually one of the things when I was a customer, and John and I didn't talk too much about this, but he and I both used the software before we ever came to work for the company. So I was a financial systems director for a subsidiary of Mannheim, and which is owned by Cox Enterprises. And, as such, I was responsible for all the systems associated with the ERP system, and that included, us having to provide consolidated financial entries to our to our HQ. And that was just an example of one of the challenges that we faced. Another one that's worth mentioning on here is this concept of kind of this lack of sufficiently trained staff. One of the challenges that I've certainly experienced over the years has been around having too many different tools in a system, too many different tools in an organization, and the cost to the organization of getting everybody trained up to use all those different tools. And as soon as you have all those different tools, or even as soon as you have one expert Excel user and the rest aren't expert Excel users, all of a sudden you've just got this huge gap in knowledge that's really hard to overcome. So absolutely agree with all of that, especially the part about not liking the auditors. All right, moving on from our poll results. Little take it, John. So the goals for year-end. So what would you do with year-end if you absolutely could? So these are the goals that, in our experience, John and I have brought together. The first is that you would want, and we would want, year-end to be quick. You know, we routinely hear customers talk about year-end that can take anywhere up to, 20 or 30 days to complete their year-end. In some cases, even longer to actually fully complete all of the different components and to prepare for their audits. What we're really shooting for is really year-end should be only maybe a day or two longer than your month-end, and frankly, your month-end should just be a couple of days. So how do we get that quick year-end? And second, we would really want that year-end to be painless. And how do we get a painless year-end? Well, we do it in a couple different ways. The first is by having no surprises. The idea that when we get to year-end, there's none of this, oh my gosh, how did that happen with this account? Quick, everybody, back to the journal entries. Let's fix this thing up. Or, I can't believe there's all these journal entries that didn't actually post. How did that happen? So avoiding those surprises and having everything run smoothly is a huge part of this painless year-end. The second part of it is around accuracy. I was recently reading some studies done by CFO Research, and they were talking, it was a 2016 study by CFO Research, and they were talking about one of the biggest concerns that financial leaders have is around confidence in their data. And that what ultimately ends up happening is that finance doesn't get data out to the business fast enough because they hold on to it while they try to validate confidence. So the business is still waiting for data that finance has, but they haven't released that data because they're not confident in those results. So imagine that accuracy is a huge factor in that year-end. And you also want year-end to provide a solid foundation for the new year. So this is your clean slate. The last thing you want to do at year-end is to sweep a bunch of stuff under the carpet that you're ultimately going to be trying to track down later, and not only trying to track down, but also then finding that those problems come back and impact your financials after the close. So John, do you want to take over here and talk a little bit about some of the challenges that people are facing around year-end?
Yeah, definitely. And I'm going to start. It's going to feel like a laundry list, but I want to kind of level set and get everyone on the same page. And I'm going to talk to you from the perspective of when I was an accountant and some of the things that I know that you all go through at year-end. And I'm going to start off just kind of with the question of why is year-end accounting so important? And to me, it's the reason why it's so important is because it's a time to reflect on all of our results for the entire year. It's a specific point in time that lets us compare not only ourselves internally, but ourselves to other industry-like peers. And so it's very important to get this time right. And when we talk about, who's looking at these results, we're talking about all the stakeholders in the business. So we're talking about creditors, investors, and employees. They all have an interest in measuring our success and measuring our profitability. So what are some of the things that we have to go through in order to clean up our year-end? And again, here's the laundry list. Starting with my own experience, I remember as manager of financial reporting having to review all of the invoicing of our shipments that went out the door immediately following in the days right after year-end. And I was doing that to make sure that all of our shipments were properly recognized from the perspective of revenue in our P&L, and making sure that we're accounting for things that we should be and not accounting for things that we should not be. Likewise, we've got goods coming in the door from our vendors and key suppliers. I needed to scrub those receipts and make sure that we recorded all the liabilities and make sure they're all properly reflected in the balance sheet and also the expenses that appear on the income statement. I had to write off bad debt. I had to review the aged AR, understand, who our customers were and why they weren't paying, and if they weren't paying, make sure that I had enough reserves to cover that. I had to recognize my prepaid expenses. I had to do my year-end inventory. I had to really run all of my financial statements and understand what was happening in those financials. So what I mean when I run financial statements is I remember sitting at my desk and looking at the balance sheet. I had a rather large report that showed I actually had like 15 to 16 months on there, and I was comparing the balances from month to month and just sort of with a ruler watching the trend line by line and managing that manually. And that was all just sort of understanding the variances that were happening in my business month over month or year over year or performance to plan. And that was all. I had to do all that in preparation for responding to the stakeholder questions that I knew were coming. So, I imagine right now, Julie, if we took the heart rates or blood pressures of the people in the audience, it's probably starting to elevate, from the beginning to where we are now. I assure you that everyone's starting to dread year end. So, and I haven't even gotten to things like review the vacation accruals or look at the 1099s that we need to ship out to suppliers.
Now, John, we don't want them to panic.
Exactly. I would say if anybody's smelling burning hair, I understand that that's a signal that you're about to have a heart attack. So that's probably what's happening right now. And I just want to really pose to the room, the audience, 3 key questions in preparation of year end. Because I think if you can answer these solidly, you're probably on a pretty good foundation. But if you can't, then you're probably using a system that I'm familiar with, which is somewhat archaic and we're here to talk about today. But let's just kind of level set and make sure that everyone kind of appreciates where they're at and where they're going into the year end right now. So for question number 1, do you have any journal entries that you haven't posted yet? Question number 2, do you know if your accounts truly reconcile, or have you been posting reversing entries repeatedly? So one of the tricks that I remember doing as an accountant, and I'm no longer an accountant, so nobody should worry, but I remember reviewing, let's say, my accounts receivable reconciliation to the general ledger. And I had reconciling issues in there that I wasn't confident in knowing what caused those issues. And so my trick was to create a journal entry that would reverse out at the start of next month. So I had some good feel for what the reconciling issue was, but until I could get it officially signed off by everyone involved in that particular transaction, I didn't feel comfortable posting it officially and permanently. So I always made a reversing journal entry. So at the year end, obviously you've got to take care of all that and make sure that you understand what caused those reversing entries or those reconciling issues, and make sure that you clean that up. So again, is that something you're aware of? Is that something you need to deal with? How do you deal with it today? Think about that during this presentation. And then lastly, the third question is, do you have any unexplained variances that you're worried about? If you do, that's one of the problems that we're trying to address with modern tools. And I wish all the activities that I just went through there, I wish we could say that those were good value-adding activities. But I think all of us would admit that they're probably not. Today we know that there are cars that can drive themselves. But I know, because I visit customers all the time, they're still using a system that's broken and hasn't changed for years. And what I'm saying to you is, wouldn't it be great, instead of doing all these laborious tasks, to rather have the time to sit with your most valuable customers and add value to them? And so that's what we're trying to accomplish. We're trying to automate as much as we can and bring value back to your customers. And the way we're going to do that is through system upgrading and step change. And I guess the other way of looking at it is, it's the holidays. Wouldn't you rather spend that with your family? So anyways, that's what's really stopping us today. We spend too much time cleaning up from a year of mistakes. Our processes take too long. We've got tons of additional reporting and audit preparation at the end of the year. And really, a lot of this can be resolved by better management of integrities and data validation, which we'll kind of highlight in this presentation. Okay, so that's kind of what's stopping us. I wanted to touch a little bit about some of the systems that we're using today and the options that you have. And I'm going to start with where we're at. And I'll lead off with a favorite quote of mine. There's a well-known author, he's also a professor, named Oren Harari, who said, you know, the electric light did not come from the continuous improvement of candles. And I liken the candle to the tools that we're using today. It hasn't changed for decades now. We're still using ERP technology that is 10, 15 years old sometimes. And that technology wasn't built for end users or accountants. And the reason for that is because ERPs were built to manage transactions or record transactions in real time. They're great at that. They just don't have end user tools that help you do research around reconciliations. It's not a tool that you put in the hands of an accountant and they can easily manage and go get their own information when they need it. So what happens is if you can't get your reports out of the ERP, you tend to turn to a business intelligence system that allows you to somewhat do dynamic reporting. But the challenge with business intelligence is it's not as much a challenge as a danger. A lot of the systems require you to extract data and run it through a ETL process, exchange, transform, load process, and it changes your data. And when it does that, it sometimes converts the data. Sometimes, or a lot of the times, it's missing data because you've made changes in your ERP that are moving over to the data warehouse. And when you go to the data warehouse, you don't have all of the information. So users really struggle in the warehouse or in the intelligence tool to really do a lot of deep diving research. And that's the kind of thing that, ultimately you're going to get into. And today when I run a report in business intelligence, I really struggle to get the answers that I need. I can get a nice dashboard that tells me what the problem is, but if I want to understand what's the source of that problem and fix the underlying problem, I probably need to go back to the ERP and get some technical help from the information technology community or the IT department. So ultimately what we end up doing is dumping to Excel, which is another big danger. We're all familiar with what happens to data when we dump it into Excel. It becomes sort of siloed and sits in individual desktops, and it doesn't communicate well with other people. How many times have you been at a table where people across from you have one number that's supposed to be the same number as yours, and it's not? And it's those scenarios that put businesses at risk, and you need to appreciate those, especially at year end. So what can we do to sort of make this a better system and really free ourselves from the frustration that we have with these tools and the low confidence that it provides? So into another poll just to get a feel for where everyone stands in this audience. We're curious what sort of tools you're using so that we can tailor our messaging to you.
Please note that this question is multi-select, so please choose all that apply and take a few moments to select your answers. As a reminder, for those attendees seeking credit for today's webcast, you will need to answer all three polling questions. This is the second one. I will leave this question up for a few more seconds to allow the remainder of the attendees to answer. And like last time, once I shut this question down, we will share the results and have John and Julie make a few comments. So please go ahead and select your answers. And now I will share the results with John and Julie. Over to you guys.
That doesn't shock me at all, John. What about you?
No, exactly what I expected.
Yeah, definitely Excel is by far the most popular option. And interestingly enough, I almost wish now that we'd added a slide that asked or a poll question asking how happy they were with Excel as a solution for these challenges. I think one of the things that always comes to mind around Excel is simply around the repetition that happens with Excel. That was always the thing that just seemed to eat up so much time, having to constantly update the data in Excel and then to track down and follow up and find all the errors in spreadsheets. And then, as John, you rightly pointed out, all the instances where you're sitting at a table and everybody has different numbers. Unbelievable.
Yeah, I really want people to rebel. I'm back to the Star Wars analogy. I want people to rebel against Excel. Excel wasn't built to be a database, and we are abusing it when we do things like reconciliations and house that information in offline spreadsheets. There are better ways to do that, and we need to move. We need to change candles here and get to a better system.
Great. Well, let's talk about what that better system looks like. So moving right along, here are the 3 things that high-growth companies need to do. And these are whether you're high-growth or just growth-driven. The goal is that if you're looking to improve your year-end, here are the 3 areas that you should be focused on in order to do that. The first is to get it right, and the second is to get efficient, and the third is to get strategic. And you've heard me mention these earlier in the webinar as well, and that's because everything that you're doing at year-end can fall into one of these 3 categories. And really, if you're doing a good job with your year-end, you should be able to sort your activities into these 3 categories. So let's go on to the first category, which is getting it right. When we talk about getting it right, we're really talking about making sure that you have all of the things that you see on the screen right here, but that basically the things that you need to do for year end, you're doing correctly, and that you have accurate data to work with. Because nothing else matters if you're dealing with incorrect, out of date, or incomplete data. None of the rest of your year-end matters because you're just going to end up having to go back and do restatements and adjustments, and that's a disaster on everybody's books. Well, okay, pun intended. So we talk about getting it right. The first thing is that it needs to be real time. It is too easy, and in fact, I've seen it happen where people are creating, adjusting entries and making corrections when in fact things just simply haven't been posted. Or they're making corrections in a third, separate database system like a BI system or like some type of separated consolidation tool. And that's purely because the data hasn't come across. But rather than wait for that data to come across, they just go in and put an adjusting entry in or try to put in some kind of a correction. That's hugely problematic. Same thing with having a single source. The goal should be to have a single source of information that is reliable. As soon as I start to, say that my financials are in my ERP, but my reporting is coming out of Excel, I have introduced a huge layer of risk into my year end. So I want to get to where I have a single source of information that is closely coupled, if not real-time coupled, to all of my source data. The third is integrity checks. This comes back a little bit more to what I was just saying before about how I need to have that reliable, valid data. When I'm looking at the information in my system, have I gone through and validated that the information in my system is correct and it is complete? And integrity is a huge part of that. When you get into systems, which is really my area of expertise, there are an unlimited number of things that can be going wrong in a system that can happen. I actually had a huge out-of-balance condition at a client that I worked with one time years ago, and you wouldn't believe it, but it was because somebody had actually unplugged an AS400 in the middle of an overnight posting process. And it took us weeks to unravel that. So, there are technical things that can happen and as well as user things that can happen to create integrity issues, and you really want to have those resolved. And then you want to make sure that you've also done some broad checks on your system. And broad checks really represent, any of the things that you would typically scan for. So, for example, I might have broad checks predefined and set up that look for the natural account balance on all my accounts. Are all my debits account holding debits? Are all my credit accounts holding credits? Do I have anything I need to validate like that? Do I need to look and see if I have any entries that are over a certain amount? Or do I need to, make sure that we haven't had any manual entries into my cash account? Whatever it is, those kinds of broad checks, which are kind of like integrity checks, but really more about user error, what can I do to make sure that those are right? And then I had revenue recognition on our list. So revenue recognition is another one. It's actually getting more and more complex, particularly if you're in the software industry. So revenue recognition is another area where, there's this huge opportunity to get this data wrong, and it can have really significant impact on your bottom line. So it's important to get that. in place and looking beyond your GL. So when we talk about the GL is absolutely one place where we certainly have to focus at year-end, but let's be honest, there's a whole bunch of other systems that actually have year-end tasks as well, not the least of which is accounts payable, which is having to produce 1099s if you're in the U.S., and produce that information out to our vendors. So there's a lot of different places that we need to look for year-end activity. GL is just one of them. And when we also talk about getting it right, we're looking at things like reconciling our subsystems. Now I've put purchasing to AP on here, but this could also be true if I'm looking to reconcile other systems like my CRM system to my general ledger or to my accounts receivable. Have I actually invoiced everything that my CRM system says that I should? That can also be tied to my revenue recognition because, again, I'm looking for, when have people started using my products and how does that impact my revenue recognition and what have I billed around my projects to make sure that it all ties together. So making sure that I have accuracy in all of my systems and that everything is connected is critical to getting it right. So your first step has to be getting it right. John, would you like to talk about some examples for this?
Perfect, yes. So I've made a dynamic presentation because we saw that one of the leading complaints about year-end is reconciliation. So we've got an example here of reconciling using a modern tool, and this is all about getting it right as you go throughout the year. So you can imagine that if you had a dashboard like this in your office, you might even have a panel in your office that you could use or a spare computer sitting around. But you display this on that computer, and every time you walk by it, you catch a glance and you can see instantly sort of what's happening in your business with regard to your key risk areas related to financial reconciliation. So accounts payable, fixed assets, et cetera, are appearing here. And when the dial's up, hey, everything's sort of aligned, everything seems to be reconciling. And as you see the dials grow, you can kind of tell, hey, we might be having a problem with some of these key reconciliation areas. And what I would say, this is an opportunity as you make a leap into a new system to think about design. And you can very easily get bogged down in design considerations about how fancy an algorithm can this tool provide in order to tell you that you have an issue in your fixed assets. But I'm here to stress, from my perspective as an accountant now working in software, don't get buried in the complexities of what software can do. Keep it simple. Build visualizations that are very smart and very easy to consume. I can tell just from this view that fixed assets has a problem. In my mind's eye, I can think about what may be causing that. Is it a timing difference of some sort of activity that I know took place and I just need to wait for it to post? Don't worry about it. Or is this dial continuing to grow and it's something that really I should probably start to address? And if you're doing this every day, because this is a real-time tool, it lets you sort of understand day by day, minute by minute, growing issues. So we're getting away from month end where we wait for everything to be generated and then look at this, and moving it more forward into the day-to-day activities and making sure that if there is a problem, we jump on it right away. And that's sort of what this environment's indicating to you. Things to jump on. So maybe there's an issue in accounts payable. An example that you would walk through really is being able to understand what's driving that variance. Why is your accounts payable not reconciling to your general ledger? Well, with this tool, you can just sort of double click and it will take you down to the transactional layer and it will show you all the variances that are out there. And from here, you can begin to have discussions with other people in the organization or the people that actually posted this transaction. You can have a conversation with them and you can add that context right here to this report so that when you come through at year end or the controller comes through or somebody else comes through like an auditor, they have that context right there at their fingertips and they understand what's happening in the business. So this is all about, generating real-time information. It only works with real-time information if you're going to do it day by day and keep on top of this. And if you do that, you're moving more from a static process into a continuous process. So there's lots to talk about continuous forecasting. That's great for planning and budgeting. But there's continuous processes happening throughout organizations, and one of them has to do with these reconciliations. And it's also going further out into the organization. So you're starting to see subsystem reconciliation, like your purchase orders to accounts payable, which companies don't normally do. They're now going deeper in understanding all of the open commitments that they have on purchase orders with vendors and suppliers and tying that back to their activity in accounts payable, which then ties to some of your accruals and some of the expenses that you hit on your income statement. So it's all tied together, and it's very, very in your face with these panel displays like you see here. So this is getting it right through real-time information and the single source of truth, which is just direct access to that underlying data source.
Or even multiple sources, right, John?
Right, exactly. Yeah, I think you're starting
so
to
see I think what John's talking about around these continuous processes, it takes us smoothly into the second area, which is in getting efficient. So once you've got the right data to work with and you're confident in that data and you know that you're correctly processing your transactions and you're not missing that, then the next step is to actually start to get efficient. So how can you expedite these processes so that you're not having to invest so much in them every single time? And this is where we start to get into that painless year-end. That painless year-end with no surprises is when it just becomes a rinse and repeat exercise. So when we look at getting efficient, here's a few items that you can think about. So first of all, you have to get it right. This is exactly what we were saying. If you haven't gotten it right, you've got to start there first. Now you get on to getting efficient. How can you automate your reconciliations? What John was showing right there is a great example. Not only can you automate those reconciliations, but you can do continuous reconciliations so that basically you're reconciling on a daily or weekly basis as you go along. And then we can correct processes rather than patching them. We certainly talked about making correction entries, but think about your processes as well. It's so easy to look at a system, and I can't tell you how many times I saw this as a systems administrator, for somebody to say, yeah, you know what, we kept having these one-sided journal entries that just showed up in our system, so we just kept deleting them, we just kept fixing them, and they never went back and figured out what was causing it. And the end result was that they were just constantly correcting the same things over and over again. Find your processes and correct them so that you don't have to deal with them anymore. And you can do that anytime during the year. You don't have to wait for year-end for that. And then you can get on to producing your year-end reports. But there's ways to expedite the production of year-end reports. So for example, in Hubble, which is the software that John and I work with, it's possible to set up report packages and set up those report packages to be dynamic so that every time you want to run them, you just get current, immediate, real-time information. And that means that you're not having to export all this data in Excel and reformat it and build it every single time you want to do it. Same thing comes with automating your audit prep. You have a pretty good idea of what those auditors are going to look for at each stage of their audit process. You can have those things pre-set up so that when it comes time, you run a package, and running that pack produces an entire set of reports that they can work with. Even better than just giving them a set of reports, you can make those auditors self-service. So you can give the auditors a controlled environment where they can explore the level of data that you want to give them access to, and they can explore it and answer their own questions. Because a huge time waste is when auditors have to keep coming back to the business and asking the finance department, hey, we have a question about this account. Can you show me which journal entries were over $25,000? Wouldn't it just be better if they could just answer those questions themselves? And then finally, decrease your follow-up requests and make everyone self-service with drill down. One of the big time sucks at year-end is every time somebody would produce a set of reports and hand them out to the business, there would invariably be this rush of calls that would come in and say, yeah, I just have a question. I don't understand why my travel and expenses, why is my airfare $5,000? I'm sure we didn't spend $5,000 in airfare. And we'd have to turn around and drill down on that in finance, produce a report, send that report out to somebody just to answer a question. Wouldn't it be great if they were working in a real-time tool where they could double-click on that number and see all the journal entries that were there? So that's when we start to talk about getting efficient, is expediting them. So John, do you want to talk a little bit about some of the examples you've got here?
Yeah, just really quick. This is pretty straightforward, but the takeaway for our audience members are, we've got to identify what drives our business, and we can do that through dashboards that indicate things like profitability ratios, working capital ratios, and liquidity ratios. We can put those on panels in the office, and we can track this day in and day out. And the benefit here is that, again, it's real time whenever you need it, but it's consistent. So you can share this information into the depths of your organization. You want to get this out there as far as you can so that when something pops up in the business, you can react to it. So you need a dynamic foundation that allows you to drill into the source of these calculations and the transactions and really provide self-service to all of those people out there. So integrated means integrated with a single source or integrated at the heart of the data at the heart of your business, and not doing it through a static ETL process, really getting at it in real time and being able to react to it as it occurs.
Perfect. And I think that takes us on to what is honestly kind of my favorite part. So let's be honest, up to now we've really just talked about, kind of getting it together and kind of getting it, faster. But really what I get excited about is when we talk about how to get strategic. How can you change your year-end processes and your approach to year-end in a way that will actually transform not only the speed at which you can deliver year-end, but the results that you can gain throughout your business during the course of the year? So when we talk about getting strategic, the first one is alerts, not reports. So if you're interested in kind of the analytics side of things, please by all means visit our website. I've got several webinars that John and I have recorded over time that talk about how to move from reports and get into KPIs and get more strategically into analytics. And the first one is about this. Reporting is just ultimately a huge waste of time. Now, certainly we have our statutory reports that we have to send out, right? Our financial statements that we have to produce. But for everything else, we should really be working through exception. And that means that instead of, printing a report and looking at it to see if there's anything wrong, the system should just be notifying us of problems that require our attention. And that's what we're talking about around alerts. So rather than me, looking to see if I've had any journal entries that are over 25,000, wouldn't it just be better if the system notified me every time that happened so that I could go and check it out immediately, acknowledge that I've looked at it, and then I don't have to think about it again? So plus it's happening in real time, so that means that instead of me looking back at a journal entry that was created 7 months ago and wondering where that little bugger came from, I'm actually able to see it on demand right when it happens. This also then leads us to documenting and improving processes. Again, this is really that business side of things. But for those of you that are still thinking about SOX every once in a while, this is a huge part of Sarbanes-Oxley, is documenting and clarifying the processes that take you through each of the activities in the organization and making sure that you're capturing all of that. When we start to get into planning, you definitely want to be looking at your planning models and refining those models and sharing those drivers with the business. For example, if there's an initiative within the organization to expand your territory or to reach out to new areas geographically, then that has implications for everybody in the organization. So making sure that you're clearly articulating your organizational goals and sharing those out will not only help at year-end when you're trying to get things set up for the following year, but of course that'll help you all through the year. Use models and planning to seed so that you can actually start with realistic, reasonable numbers. So rather than planning and budgeting from scratch, because if we look at year-end, another component of year-end is actually making sure that our budgets and our forecasts are ready for the following year. Make sure that you're using, correct models and that you're seeding those planned fields with valid data so people aren't working from scratch. That will absolutely save time. And evaluate what is driving your business so that you're able to monitor those business drivers and react to them. And finally, devising scorecards and checkpoints, because what you really want your year-end to be is to be the starting blocks of a long race. And that race should have some great checkpoints along the way so that you can stop and get a cup of water on your marathon and so that you can have some celebrations when you cross certain key thresholds. And you really need that for the business for all kinds of reasons. John, do you want to throw anything out there?
Yeah, just you mentioned strategic, and for me that's all of those things encompassed in accountability. And with the new automation, I believe that it's much easier to hold people accountable. And you can kind of see an example here of that. But it's about keeping statistics and the valuable information, like who's actually completed their monthly review, did they approve it or reject it. And when people reject, they can start discussions that add real valuable context around the data. And this context is stored centrally and available to everybody in the organization and even people outside. So if you think about auditors, they might even have access to this, and that's going to move your organization along quite dynamically because you're starting to hold people accountable, and you're going to have visibility to that. Part of visibility is also exhibited here. Just again, if you put yourself in this world, you can walk by this panel and in an instant you can understand what's happening. You can interpret the data you're looking at. You know that Europe has a long way to go to make their target, and Australia, hey, way to go. And it's this, when you're thinking about year end and about how you can build dashboards and scorecards that provide checkpoints throughout the year and even during the months that go by, sharing this information around the business and empowering your users to jump at these new opportunities or actually even dive away from real business risks, we shouldn't be waiting to make those decisions at year end. We should be doing that sooner and continuously, and that's going to help drive a better year end process for you and drive better performance as well.
Perfect, I agree. And I think another great thing that you were showing on that screenshot, John, was the fact that that had real-time currency restatement as well. I know that was one of the things that people had mentioned early on as being a challenge with multi-currency. So having that real-time currency restatement also makes you, so much more able, to assess the business in real time. So what could your future hold? So, what's the point of expediting your month then? Like, what's it really worth to you? Yeah, you get to go home a little bit earlier, and maybe you don't have to work late quite so many days, and it's a little bit less stressful. But let's talk about what it actually could result in for the business. So first of all, it could save you significant amount of money on your audit. There's a case study on our website, for example. One of our customers was able to specifically attribute implementing our software as a way of actually saving money on their annual audit. The amount of time that their auditors had to spend reviewing their accounts was significantly less. So, things like that is a great example of some real tangible ROI from chasing an improved year-end process. Of course, you get that faster year-end that we were just talking about, but you also get increased confidence. Just for example, having drill down can change the way that people feel about the data that you're presenting to them, particularly executives. If they know at any time, they can double-click on a number and see where it's coming from, all of a sudden there's just a huge sigh of relief that comes out from the organization that they can trust the data that they're looking at. So make sure that you're giving everyone tools and access to data so that they can feel confident about it, whatever tool you're using. And rolling processes. I think as John rightly pointed out, look for ways that you can take anything that you're doing at year end and ask yourself, is this something that I could be doing throughout the year as opposed to just at year end? And if you could be doing it throughout the year end, what is the most frequent that you could do it? Could you do it by alert only? Could you do it every week? Could you do it every month? How could you be checking this off and then get that process distributed into a wider time frame? Of course, the result for all of this is that what you actually end up doing is you actually end up freeing yourself up with more time so that you can actually advise the business instead of just answering to it. So that should be the goal of all of us related to finance. We hold the keys to telling the business as a scorecard, here's where you're getting the greatest bang for your buck as an organization. Here's where we should be investing our time. Here's where we shouldn't be investing. And consequently, when we're busy running reports, we are not advising the business as effectively as we should be. And that's the motivation for improving year-end above everything else, in my opinion. John, is there anything else you would add here?
No, I think you summed it up nicely, and I would just add to it, it's not just answering to the business, but it's also spending more valuable time with your most important customers.
Absolutely. I think that's a great summation. So we've taken a moment here. This is our website. This is John and I's email. I believe Q&A is going to come open here in just a second. But, it's the kind of thing that we feel strongly about, that by looking at how you can expedite and improve these processes, you can transform your business. Organizations like Gartner and our customers agree that when you need to do financial performance management, that's the focus has to be on how do you get it right, get it efficient, and get strategic. Back over to you, Jess, for some Q&A.
Great. Thank you so much, John and Julie. We want to say thank you for an excellent session. As Julie mentioned, we are now going to transition to some Q&A. Just as a reminder, you can still submit questions at any time using the Q&A section of the interface. So our first question that came in for you guys is, do you see companies moving away from reporting in favor of analytics?
I'll take that one, John. I certainly see that. In fact, recently I was at a big convention and I did a presentation on moving from reports to KPIs, and I had a couple hundred people that showed up, and we ended up having to, actually repeat the session. And it's because, people are looking for ways to get more without having to spend more. People aren't getting more headcount in finance just because they need it. They're looking for ways to become more efficient, and analytics is certainly the biggest way to do that, focusing on the questions that they need to have answered rather than on producing a whole bunch of data that they might possibly need. So I would absolutely say that's true.
Excellent. Thanks, Julie. Our next question is, what are some of the areas where planning technology can be applied outside of the GL?
I suppose it's my turn, Julie? Yeah.
I'd say.
Planning technology can be used for a variety of things, and I really try to push this out, because planning to me is just data collection. And if you think about data collection, you instantly go to Excel spreadsheets. That's everyone's habit. So I see more and more technology being replaced with planning that allows you to collect data and move away from Excel. So certainly anything you're doing in Excel could probably be leveraged in a planning, reporting, and analytics type tool.
Excellent. Thanks so much, John. Our final question that came in from the audience is, are there any different suggestions that you guys have for international companies?
Yeah, I think one of the big things, and of course this didn't even come up in introductions, but I'm currently sat in England right now. I think one of the biggest things for international companies is to really think about, those special requirements of international companies and what you can do and what tools you can use that would help you with that. So for example, I've done quite a bit of work in Europe. In fact, I spent a lot of time, I lived in Europe when the euro came out, for those of you that can think back that far and are that traumatized by that. Perhaps just me. And, it was an interesting challenge having to deal with the euro, but more than that was looking at all the statutory reporting requirements of all of these other countries, and the challenges associated with having financial reporting that met not only our U.S. companies' needs, but also allowed us to artfully and completely and carefully answer all of the statutory reporting requirements and all the other geographies that we operated in. So making sure that you're looking at the tools that are available to you that would support you not only in your domestic locations, but also in all those foreign locations. And that's everything from, hey, can this solution, or is there reporting options for getting me currency restatement? And are there options available for me to produce statutory accounts as well as my GAAP accounts? So just looking at that whole picture, I think, is an important factor around that.
Great. Thank you so much, Julie. We're almost at the top of the hour, so we did want to share a few final items. We want to say thanks again to John and Julie for a wonderful session. As a reminder, their slides can be found under the handout section of the interface. Please join us at www.performative.com to continue the conversation with your peers. And if you'd like an introduction to John, Julie, or Hubble, you can tell us in the survey. Once again, we want to thank our partner Hubble for making today's webinar possible. And finally, we'll now transition to our third and final polling question. The third polling question is, what is your number one goal for improving year-end? The options are improve my reporting tools, improve my budgeting and planning process, develop my staff to handle more issues, automate more year-end processes, or move to continuous processes. As a reminder, you must answer all three polling questions to receive credit for today's webinar, and to be conscious of everyone's time, we'll read the most popular answer, but we will not have a discussion around the results. As we are taking a few moments to answer the remainder to allow the remainder of the attendees to respond, just a reminder that we value any and all feedback, so please be sure to fill out the brief survey that you'll see pop up on your screen once we close the meeting out. I will leave this polling question up for a few more seconds before closing everything down. So please go ahead and make your final selections here. And you can see that the most popular answer is automate more year-end processes. We want to thank everyone again for joining us for today's webinar and hope that you enjoy the rest of your day.